So for this morning, we're going to discuss communication models. Last time we have discussed process and the elements of the communication. Now we're going to discuss some different types of communication models. Let's start first with the linear communication models. So the linear communication model, this is the first kind of model that experts have made to understand the process of communication. So that's linear. I'm going to show to you later how a linear communication model looks like. But let us discuss first what are the characteristics of the linear model. So the first one, a linear communication model is unidirectional. We say unidirectional, it is a one-way communication. So senders can only transmit messages while receivers can only receive the messages. And what is lacking here in this linear communication model is that there is no feedback, which is no feedback is expected to happen. That is why that linear communication model is unidirectional. You're the sender, you'll just only transmit the message. You're the receiver, you'll only receive the message. Another characteristic is a linear communication model is simple. Okay? It is a simple communication act. Let's discuss later on. If you look at the figure, no, it doesn't really look like a process. When you see or when you saw later on the communication model of the linear communication model. Sorry. So instead, it looks like the transmission of one-way casualty, which is conveying of only a cause and effect. That is why that characteristic is simple. Next one is linear communication model is a persuasion and not mutual understanding. So this model promotes one-way direction of communication, which promotes advice and influence rather than understanding from both the sender and the receiver. So that's a persuasion. Because again, the emphasis here, there is lacking feedback. So there is no mutual understanding that is happening in the process. And the last one is that values psychological per social effects. So this model focuses more on the psychological effects. Okay, when we say psychological effects, it's more on understanding the message, but there is no social effects. There is no building. They are not building a relationship with the receiver or your communicator among the communicators. So there is no assurance that the message was effective because the receiver is only concerned with the delivery of message and will know the effect of on the receiver because of the lack of feedback. So here is the linear communication model. As you can see, the sender, which only sends the message there, and then the receiver. No feedback. It says here that it's more on the psychological effects. It's more on understanding the message. You send your message to the receiver, just receive. Okay? So there is no feedback. There's no emphasis here on the feedback. So as you can see here on the communication process, no? Walang feedback na nangyayari. So here are some examples of linear communication models. So the first one is the Shannon-Weaver. The Shannon-Weaver, this is also known as information theory model that was primarily developed to illustrate transmission of electronic information back in 1948. I'm going to show you later how a Shannon-Weaver linear communication looks like. Okay, so there are 6 elements of the Shannon-Weaver model. So there is the information source or sender, there's the transmitter or emitter, there's the channel, the receptor or decoder, there's the receiver or destination, and other one is noise. So let's start first with the information source or the sender. Of course, the sender is who is the one chooses the message to be communicated to the receiver and the channel to use and send the message. Okay, so that's the role of the sender or the source. Next, when the sender is now sending the message, it's time for him to transmit or to encode the message. So this changes the message into a signal and then sends it over the communication channel. So the channel here is, of course, the medium the sender used to transmit the message. Okay, so the sender here chooses the message and the one who chooses the channel or the medium. The next is, now that now the sender have chosen his medium, then it's time to decode the message, or yeah, it decodes and then sent over the channel, which will be received by the receiver or destination. This is the person or group of people who must get the message. So the receiver can then provide a feedback, which will then reverse their roles. Yes, they can reverse now their roles on the Shannon-Weaver model. And throughout the communication model, there is a noise. That's the sixth element. This is a kind of disturbance coming from people, environment, internal knowledge, beliefs, which will hinder the receiver from getting and understanding the message. So here is the Shannon-Weaver's model of communication. Shannon-Weaver. So you can see here, there's the sender, and then the encoder, or the transmitter, and then the channel. Of course, there is an expectation here of the noise during the transmission of the message, and then the decoder here, and then the destination or the receiver. Then the receiver will now have his feedback sent back to the sender. This feedback means if the receiver has understood the message or if he understood the message or the response, or it has a positive response on the message. So that's the Shannon-Weaver model of communication. Now another one is the Berlow's SMCR model. So the one who created, of course, who conceptualized this one is David Berlow. When we say SMCR, it means sender, message, channel, receiver. Okay? It happened during the 60s. So he emphasizes here the encoding and the decoding parts of the process. So there are 4 components here. As you can see, it's SMCR. So source or sender, message, channel, and receiver. Let's take a look here at the Berlow's SMCR models of communication. Let's start here first with the sender. So under sender, there are some qualities. The first one is communication skills. So the sender plays a significant role here in the process. So when we say communication skills here, it includes writing, speaking, listening, presenting, and reading. So those are some communication skills. If the sender is not good on those communication skills, then the message might be lost in the process of transmission. Okay, so the source or the sender must have this type of skills, must have this communication skills. Another one is attitudes. So you have to have the right kind of attitude because it plays an important role here in the process. Attitudes. Okay? So the sender's attitudes towards others, himself or herself, and the environment can affect the meaning of the message. So before you send the message, you have the right kind of attitude towards others, not only others, but of course with yourself. Okay? That's attitude. Another one is knowledge. Knowledge here is, of course, it needs to familiarize himself with the subject or the topic at hand because it adds or it gives value and impact to the message. That is why you need to have a basic knowledge or a knowledge of the subject or the topic that you are discussing or talking or communicating. Okay, another one is social system. So in social system, this is more on beliefs, in religion, in the social status, the values, and other social factors. They can affect how the sender communicates the message and how the receiver understands it. So it's very important here, the social system is important in the qualities of the sender. So the situation or the place or the environment of the sender is also part of this element. Okay, so you take a look at your environment, you take a look around at your place because it's also part of the communication process. It's also part of this element. And the last one is culture, because culture differences can make you difficult to communicate because each one of us have different cultures, have different cultural backgrounds. So if some culture may accept something while the others, may find it offensive or might find it negative. So you have to be careful, of course, when communicate a person with a different culture background. Baka mag-culture, it may have, cultural barriers to effective communication. It will happen, no? So culture can be also under social system. Pwede siya maging under social system because, of course, it's more on the socializing way of talking or the way of communicating. So it's very important to check first the background of the cultural background of the sender or the receiver. Next one here, of course, you consider it in codes. Then here's now the message. So under message is content, elements, treatment, structure, and code. So let's start first with the content. When we say content, of course, that's the entirety of the message. It covers the beginning up till the end. So you have to know what the content of your message. Another one is elements. This what comprise the message. It includes the gestures, the body language, the language itself, and haptics. Okay? Content will be accompanied by elements. Okay? Another one is treatment. Treatment here is how the message is delivered. It is how you would package your message. So you have to make sure how would you deliver your message to your receiver. So it's very important. Check the treatment first. Next is structure. It refers to the arrangement of elements in the content of your message. So before you send your message, you have to make sure the structures is correct, the elements there is found, or check your elements, okay? Check your content, and you organize well your ideas or your message, okay? Because the arrangement of elements, it affects the effectivity and impact of your message. So that structure is very important. And the last one is code. Code is the form in which the message will be sent. So it could be in the form of videos, in a spoken words, in text, in culture, okay? Because the improper use of this code will lead you to miscommunication. So it's very important to know what kind or in what form are you going to send your message? Are you going to send it via chat, via FaceTime, Viber? So you have to know your code. Okay? So now that you already organized well the message, now you have to know what would be your medium or the channel. The channel here includes the 5 senses of your body. So that's hearing, seeing, touching, smelling, and tasting. Hearing, of course, when you use your ears. And seeing, the sense of sight, it needs to be activated because when you talk or when you communicate to someone, it's very important to have eye contact. Touching, through communication through touching is very important. It's also important. It has a message to tell also. Smell can also be used as a channel of communication. Okay, because for example, if you smell something good in a food, it means masarap yung pagkain, no? But if example, if you will know if there's a danger nearby if you could smell the fire, no? Pag naamoy mo na yung apoy, that means there's danger nearby or there is a fire in your neighborhood. But so smelling is very important. And of course, taste can also be a channel of communication. So the tongue has millions of taste buds. You check your taste buds, it has a million. Check your tongue because it has a lot of taste buds. Saddle can be used to decipher. That is the taste, the sense of tasting. Now that you have your channel, it's time for you to decode, and the receiver should have also the qualities or the elements as source or the sender have. Okay, I don't need to one by one that because I have already mentioned each qualities on the center. Okay, now let's proceed now to the transactional communication models. So these are communication models that illustrates how the sender and the receiver take turns in conveying and receiving messages. We call the sender and the receiver communicators. So their roles are reversed in sending and receiving the message occurring at the same time. So that's transactional communications model. So one example of transactional communication model is the dance helix model. So the helical model, as you can see there below, that's the example of a dance helix model. This is conceptualized by Frank Dance. When we say helix, this is an object, this is a three-dimensional shape that, like that of a wire, yeah, it looks like a wire which put uniformly around a cylinder or cone, like a corkscrew or coil that grows bigger and bigger as it moves up. As you can see here, maliit pa siya sa baba. It looks small and then it looks bigger and bigger when it's going up. If it's going up. Now, it illustrates here how the development and the growth of communication or communicative actions will always be based on your previous experiences or behaviors. So it shows here that the person's understanding of a message or thought is, of course, influenced by the external and the internal factors that are learned throughout our life or throughout life. Okay? This also shows that the person understanding, yeah, I think I have mentioned that before, I'm sorry. So to better understand the helix model, I will give you an example now. Because when we were small, when we were babies, the one way that we can communicate is crying. So if a baby cries, so it means that if the baby is hungry or needs to change his diaper or they wanted to be wrapped to sleep, no, they wanted to tucked in sleeping. Okay, but as you grow now, they continue to use crying as a language in the toddler years. Toddlers, I think toddlers between 1 to 5 years old, 1 to 4 years old. So this is the stage on the how they learn to speak during this year. So aside now from crying, to get what they want, they also communicate using the vocabulary they learned. So, diba, when we you have babies at home, if you have little brothers or little sisters, I think you have experienced that when during if they're 1 year old or few months before 1 year old, so um they have learned simple words such as mama, papa. Okay, for they have developed their what do you call this, their the vocabulary up until they grow up and up. So that's the job of Cocomelon. If you are familiar with Cocomelon. But you know, there are some children right now who are their first language of course is English. Some of their first language is of course their dialect. No, it develops from time over time. Now, as you grow older now, your vocabulary increases. You increase now your vocabulary. And you not only learn, and they learn to utilize not only in words, but in non-verbal communication. That cues to communicate what they want or they need to others. So you're now already teenagers. So it's more important, action is more important than words. So actions has a message to tell. Even though you're, even with just poking your friend or just a tap at the back. So there are some or these are what you call non-verbal communication gestures, okay, or body languages. So this build-up of experiences to send and receive messages can be explained here by the helical model of communication. Okay, so that's Dan's helix model. Now let's proceed with interactive communication model. Interactive communication model, this is also known as convergence model. In this model, it emphasizes the coding and decoding components of the process. So it focuses on the cycle and message exchanges between the sender and the receiver. So these messages will always be affected by the field of experience. So it's based on the experience here of the sender or the receiver. So these are the communication patterns rising from factors such as psychological, social, cultural, societal, or situational experiences or gain knowledge. Okay? So an example of interactive communication model here is the Schramm's model of communication, because this model states the communication is a never-ending process. So in this Schramm's model of communication, it emphasizes the encoding and the decoding parts of the process. I will show to you later on how a Schramm's model of communication looks like. So the role here of the receiver and the sender can be switched, will eventually switch with each other as they continue exchange of messages. So may feedback, there will be a feedback and then there will an interchanging of roles. So feedback now here is seen as the most important part of this model. Unlike linear communication model, there's no feedback. In Schramm's model of communication, there's now a feedback. Okay, and this is one of the most important part of this model. So this Schramm's model of communication can be used in either interpersonal or intrapersonal communication. So this is an example of a Schramm's model of communication. Okay, so let's try to say this is sender and this one is receiver. So both of them can, exchange their ideas. The message here is, of course, it's like their feedback. Yes, because they have a never-ending process when they communicate and they communicate. So it's a never-ending process. So that's what Schramm's model of communication um, is here for. You already know the sender here or the transmitter. Of course, that's the who sends the message. The encoder, it converts the message. Of course, you already know the decoder. There is an interpreter here in the Schramm's model of communication. Interpreter here is the one who tries to understand and analyze the message carefully. Okay? Of course, you already know the receiver, the message, and of course the feedback. Okay? This is a process wherein receiver responds to the received message. And there is another here, it's the field of experience. When you say the field of experience, this is a pattern which affects the communication process. Field of experience. This can be form of society, culture, situations, psychological, or sociological events or experiences of the sender and the receiver. Okay, so that's the Schramm's model of communication.